right now. And it'll be made available on our Cornell ILR Buffalo Commons YouTube channel, and the link will also be emailed to everyone who registered. So, Nyawiskeno Onodowaga ni a Agiswe Gayo. I'm Kriki Kazak. I'm Seneca Hawk Clan in Polish, and I work on Buffalo Commons, which is a joint collaboration between Partnership for the Public Good, a local community-based think tank here in Buffalo, New York, which I think some of you may be familiar with, and our Cornell University ILR Buffalo CoLab. Thank you for joining us today during our lunchtime workshop, Leveling the Playing Field, ensuring our new Buffalo Bills Stadium benefits communities across Erie County. The Bills Mafia is known for smashing tables, but even more so for its generosity. And we hope that the spirit and sentiment of our community can be woven into the planning of our new stadium. Before we begin too, I want to acknowledge the celebration of Black History Month and the multitude of contributions, both recognized and all too often unrecognized, of our Black and African-American brothers and sisters that they've had throughout history and in the work that we do every day. Finally, I want to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. In keeping with regional protocol, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and by honoring the sovereignty of the Six Nations, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, Tuscarora, and their land where we are situated and where the majority of this work takes place. In this acknowledgement, we hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories and remorse for the harms and mistakes of the far and recent past. And we pledge to work towards partnership with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Finally, I'm just going to go run through some quick logistics. If you need closed captioning, there's a button at the bottom of your Zoom window labeled CC. Additionally, we have enabled the chat. It would be great for folks to introduce themselves. It could be your organization or other affiliation. And it would be great if you could include any specific topics, thoughts, questions that brought you to today's conversation. Throughout this talk, you're encouraged to ask questions through the chat, but we're hoping to save most of them until the end so that we can lift them up to our panelists. As I mentioned earlier, the link to this recorded session and any materials that are mentioned will be provided in the follow-up email. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Andrea to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Kriki. Always such a lovely and gracious host for our Buffalo Commons workshop. So really appreciate that opening. Thank you also to our co-sponsors for this quick hour workshop today. Voice Buffalo, we have their director, Whitney Walker, with us, the Coalition for Economic Justice as well. So we are grateful for their engagement around this issue. We also have with us John Goldstein, who is the founder of Coalition's Campaigns and Community Benefits and has supported many efforts for community benefits agreements around the country. And just in case I didn't say, I'm Andrea O'Sullivan, Director at Partnership for the Public Good. Today, we are going to look quite briefly at stadium and arena CBAs in other communities, really reflecting on what is possible when we talk about these large public investments and what community benefits can come through them. We're going to share with you all what we've heard so far from partners among our network of their priorities for this Buffalo Bills Stadium deal. What would we really like to achieve together? I'll turn it over to John then to share with us key lessons and questions from his work, looking at other stadium deals. And there's really interesting aspects for us to dig into there. And then we'll have lots of time for discussion. We really want to have time to hear your priorities. What are issues and concerns that are not being addressed so far that we can discuss together? So we'll have lots of time for discussion. Last week, a group of our partners gathered here on Jefferson Avenue in front of the Johnny B. Wiley Athletic Pavilion, which is formerly known as the Rock Pile and was an early home of the Buffalo Bills for some decades. And the speaker in this photo is Karima Amin, who is a storyteller in Buffalo and a former public school teacher. And she shared her memories of going to see the Buffalo Bills play as a child with her father at the Rock Pile. She said they had the best popcorn in the world, the best popcorn she's ever had. But more so, she really reflected on what that meant for Jefferson Avenue, the East Side community, to have such an active center, to, of course, at that time have vibrant businesses, economic activity going on, and how much has been removed and lost at that community. So we'll put in the link, actually, the video from this so folks can see. A big takeaway from that was, even though the Bills have moved in location, and that appears to be remaining this time, that it will very, very likely be an Orchard Park location, that we still want to make sure the benefits of this new deal and this new stadium reach communities like that location on Jefferson Avenue, reach communities all across the county that have needs across health, equity, youth services, topics we're going to talk about today. So what's possible in a CBA? I'm going to do this real quickly, and John will be sharing more with us too. But this is a little summary of what we've seen when we zoom in, especially on stadium and arena deals. So all the way back to 2005, there was a deal in San Diego around a ballpark village, a kind of development around a Major League Baseball stadium, for, listing out kind of environmental friendly design standards, building practices, local hiring, and living wage jobs. So we start to see some of these categories emerge: environmentally friendly design, hiring, living wage jobs. In Pittsburgh in 2008, there was quite a large deal for the Pittsburgh Penguin Arena, where an extensive coalition won $8 million in funding for neighborhood projects. John's going to tell us a lot more about that one. That's one of the classic CBAs where the construction was happening right in a neighborhood, unlike kind of our situation here with an Orchard Park Stadium. So that was a neighborhood that for many decades went without a grocery store, and that was a key part of their deal. 2016 Milwaukee Bucks, I know John's going to tell us more about this too. They brought in living wage and local hiring guarantees that extend not only in that construction phase, but for long-term service and retail jobs that would be going on in the arena. So when we look at priorities expressed for Buffalo, we also look at that. What happens in the construction phase versus the ongoing long-term employment that can happen at stadiums and arenas. 2017 Atlanta Falcons, a $40 million agreement that invests in parks, a job center, housing, and social programs. So we start to see this expansion of benefits, not only construction, not only jobs and environmental standards, but really this investment in surrounding communities as well. Nashville 2018, again, affordable housing, a childcare facility on the development site, and then interestingly providing retail spaces and reduced rate rental spaces for artisans and small businesses. So trying to really open up some economic opportunity to smaller actors at the stadium. And then most recently in Los Angeles, there was a huge deal for construction around a big new economic development zone around the Clippers. And this is a fascinating one because they're not actually receiving a big public amount of funds, but they have recognized they have to invest in the surrounding communities. So they've committed to $100 million for housing, education, libraries, youth programs, a lot of social and infrastructure improvement. And that, I think, is a significant one because it's a CBA we can look to that was negotiated following the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think really acknowledges all of the inequities that all of our community partners have been pointing to, that what the pandemic really revealed. How can we, have investment in healthcare, housing, and education, and not just focus on these big development projects? So what are priorities for the Buffalo Bills deal that we have heard so far from community partners here? So as I mentioned, starting out, of course, in the construction phase, we can look for project labor agreements for paying prevailing wages and benefits to every construction worker. We can look at hiring targets for hiring local workers, awarding contract to minority and women-owned business enterprises. I think for many of our partners, this is kind of the bare minimum. We want to see these labor standards, these MWBE targets. Some of that would be required anyway when state funding is involved. So we almost have an expectation of that level of benefit at this point. Then we can look to ongoing stadium jobs. And we see in some communities development of first source or targeted hiring programs where folks are recruited from local neighborhoods or from low-income neighborhoods across the county, we could do in this case, for stadium jobs that would be ongoing in games and events in the new stadium for many years to come. We've seen in other places even referral and employment centers, job training, and new living wage commitments around some of those ongoing stadium jobs. Other categories of benefits that our partners have raised are, again, environmental standards and impact. We want to see like LEED certification, good construction practices. There's precedence for that from other CBAs. It's been discussed here among partners, can we hire locally for stormwater management? Obviously, there's going to be a whole lot of new paving and parking lots. We've seen in other parts of the city and county great efforts to have rain gardens and stormwater treatment so that that doesn't have an impact on local infrastructure. So could we hire some of our local partners that do that work for the stadium as well? Public transit, I saw that Bridge from Buffalo Transit Riders United had joined us, and Bridge recently spoke at the press conference around the need for not only fan and worker public transit to and from the stadium, but really for ongoing improved public transit links between the city and the Southtowns location for all kinds of work and school and other opportunities. So maybe we'll ask Bridge to jump in on that in our discussion as well. And then youth sports, we have seen, of course, some ongoing Boys and Girls Club support from the Buffalo Bills Foundation and Pagula Sports and Entertainment. With this stadium deal, partners really want to see increased investment, much more grants made available for youth sports and family recreation programs across the county. They want to see Pagula Sports providing facilities, equipment improvements for youth athletics programs, especially in neighborhoods where that programming is currently very limited. And then finally, we've had partners raise public arts. We've seen funding for arts, youth, and cultural services in the surrounding communities and other CBAs. And we have partners here that have had a big focus on hiring frontline artists, those most impacted by racism, economic, environmental injustice. If there can be wonderful public art in the stadium and around parking lots, let's make that commitment and hire local frontline artists from the county to create it. Again, as mentioned, support for small retailers, vendors, artisans. We've seen in a couple places where they've provided lower rent space or even retail spaces outside of the stadium so that that's not such an exclusive economic opportunity for official team gear, bringing in other vendors and small businesses. And then a big one, which I'm sure John will bring to us as well, is community representation in decision-making. Many of the CBAs referenced above included advisory and implementation committees, monitoring bodies, master planning committees even, that include a lot of community leaders, community group representation. And that's something that is not clearly on the table at this point in our Erie County discussions of this, and I think is a critical part for really making sure there is ongoing community representation at the table. And then finally, direct community investments. You know, we've got, again, the issue here of the stadium will most likely be in Orchard Park that is outside of neighborhoods that many of them need these direct investments. The chairwoman of our county legislature, April Baskin, has put out a proposal called Invest Well that calls for some direct community investments like health and equity wellness funds, funding for safe neighborhood efforts, fresh food, resources to improve housing stock. So looking to more recent CBAs like Los Angeles, I think, and really saying, we know what we need is direct investment in these community needs across the county, and we deserve a CBA that makes these commitments very specific and extensive. So I'm going to leave it there. That's kind of where we are in the conversation in Buffalo. And I'm really happy to welcome John Goldstein, again, the founder of Coalition's Campaigns of Community Benefits. John, I think you're my personal encyclopedia on CBAs, and he sends out a wonderful newsletter, always updating all the different CBA conversations going on around the country. So it's great to have you with us. again, virtually in Buffalo. I know you've been here before with other partners and other community benefit discussions.
Well, thanks. And it's great to be back in Buffalo, even if it's virtual. I started working with Community Coalition in really a long time ago. About 1975, I was a cab driver. We were organizing for a union. We went on strike, and in order to win the strike, we had to organize our riders and the broader community. And I realized from that experience that building coalition, in that case between labor and the community, was a really powerful tool. I after that was a bus driver in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm actually a retired bus driver now from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hi to the bus riders union. We love them. And we did build a really strong coalition between our union, bus riders, and environmentalists, and were able to win big increases in state funding, which meant much better outcomes for our members, but also more transit service, lower fares. So I've done this work for a really long time. I got specifically involved in community benefits as head of the Milwaukee Labor Council. We were in conversations with our sister labor councils around the country, including Los Angeles, where the beginning of this community benefits process and idea started. And I took on a job. I actually left the labor movement, went to work for a nonprofit called the Partnership for Working Families. And I helped start permanent community labor coalitions, many of whom were working on community benefit agreements around the country. So it's really the coalition building is probably the only marketable skill that I have. I'm not very good at too many other things, but fortunately, I've been able to make a living doing this my whole life. So I did want to share with you some thoughts, and they're really intended to just be thoughts, and I hope that you'll be sure to keep any questions in mind. I really want this to just be the beginning of a conversation. So that does it. Hang on, I must be sharing the wrong screen. Hold on one second.
That one looks good.
That was. Let's try that, and then from the beginning, that one I think will work. Let's see.
Looks good.
All right. So let's just start getting the big elephant out, in the room. Publicly funded stadiums are bad deals. They're just bad deals, but they happen anyway. And there's this, very visceral kind of feeling that exists in many cities around their team. And politicians like them. They're big deals. They get to make these billion-dollar deals. And so this, in almost every case, the stadium gets built. We'll talk about a few exceptions to that. But there's rarely any real important economic gain. And my favorite quote about this is that if you want to inject money into the local economy, it would be better to drop it from a helicopter than invest in a new ballpark. So let's just, that's just something that's a fact. Why are they bad deals? Often hundreds of millions of dollars in public costs, some that are visible, some that are hidden, like infrastructure improvements. Economists always say they have negative economic impact. The people that own these teams are already very, very wealthy, and yet we're still building their new factory for them. The investment and the tax abatements often result in decreased revenue for schools and public services that are desperately needed. And this last one I wanted to spend a minute on because this piece is a little bit hidden, but often part of the deal is that teams get control of a very large footprint for entertainment, housing, commercial development. Almost every stadium deal, in the past few years, really more than 10 years now, has included this kind of ancillary development. In Milwaukee, with their new arena, the team built, they said, oh, we're going to help all the bars and restaurants around the arena, but then the team built their own entertainment district adjacent to the arena, which took away business from the very people that they were promising to help. And so this part rarely, I can't think of any place where it's come up as part of the civic debate, but it's something to keep your ears out for. I know we're talking about a very big kind of suburban site, and there's the question of what happens to the land under the existing stadium, and I think it's worth paying attention to that discussion. Always, when the discussion comes up and community folks are saying, well, we think we should be getting some return on our investment, the public's investment, there's a threat to move. And it's happened virtually every time that there's a discussion like this anywhere, there's a threat to move. Now, there are cases where teams have moved. In Seattle, the basketball team wanted a very big public investment in a new arena, and the politicians, everyone, the vast majority of decision makers in Seattle decided it was a bad deal, and they just weren't going to be held hostage, and the team left, and they invested in a soccer team that's very successful, and so the instances, though, where the team actually left are pretty few and far between, and I can't think of any place where there was the kind of political support for a team that there is in Buffalo, where the team actually left. I mean, the deal will almost definitively get done. It's a question of how good a deal it is. Right now in Oakland, there's a very similar process going on. There's a stadium planning process happening in Oakland, but this is the baseball team. They also are engaged with Las Vegas about building a stadium, and they're kind of playing the two sides off against each other. Just like the fact that they're bad deals, it's also a fact that they're going to threaten to move. So it's time to flip the script. The first thing that a successful coalition has to do is convince ourselves that we're investors. We're not begging for something that's not part of what we're entitled to. It's our money, it's our land. We have a right to a seat at the table and a reasonable return on our investment. These are really important principles, and it's important to be constantly reminding yourself and each other of this, because we're not begging for something that, we're not begging for crumbs. We really want to be part of the decision-making process, and we're entitled to be part of it. So let's talk quickly, and Andrea went through some of these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Soccer stadiums have been a big deal because Major League Soccer required every franchise to have a soccer-specific stadium. So it's resulted in, a significant number of new soccer stadiums being built, some with CBAs, some without CBAs. Nashville was a place that had no prior experience, but a very strong coalition came together, and they were able to address the kinds of needs that you see replicated in CBA after CBA: housing issues, wages, local hiring and workforce. And they did have a community advisory committee. Compliance and enforcement are really important elements of doing this work. Often, we think, oh, we've got the CBA, now we're done. And in fact, often compliance and enforcement are critical elements to success. And so being sure that there's a very clear reporting obligation on the part of the developer and on the part of the county in this case, because they're providing a lot of the funds, and that there's very strong community oversight. Shouldn't be forgotten, because it's essential if it's going to be a successful agreement. The Milwaukee Bucks Arena, I spent 40 years in Milwaukee, so was able to be part of developing stages of accountable development work, starting with local hire, which often is the easiest piece to do because politicians and city bureaucrats all want to see local jobs made available. And so in Milwaukee, that's where the work began, built over time. Now, Milwaukee, about 20 years ago, did build a new baseball stadium, which was in an area. First, Milwaukee's a lot like Buffalo, too. The baseball stadium was built in an area similar to where the Bills are. They tore down the old county stadium and built a new baseball stadium adjacent to it. They wanted a lot of land for tailgating, and it did not disrupt an existing neighborhood. So much of that, and I didn't put a slide in about it because I really hadn't thought about it until listening to Andrea, but that even for that stadium where a neighborhood was not being disrupted, the issue of local hire and hiring from disadvantaged neighborhoods what was very successfully made a part of the deal. And before the legislature approved the deal, which they only approved by one vote, it was a very close vote, they did write an agreement around local hiring and training for disadvantaged residents. So it does not have to be a direct neighborhoods that are directly impacted. I think that there are a lot of community needs that can drive this kind of a coalition. The important thing about Milwaukee Bucks Arena was that they broke new ground when they included permanent workers in terms of the wages. Now, this agreement was 2016, and they had agreed to $15 by 2023. They're way beyond that already because of what's happening in terms of wages. But the $15 in 2016 was quite a breakthrough. It's not a CBA unless the community is engaged. And this, again, is a little bit of a warning sign. Sometimes a developer, sometimes a city council, sometimes local officials will come up and say, well, we've got a CBA and it's going to do all these great things for the community. And they do it without ever having talked to the community. A good example of that was in Pittsburgh, when the One Hill Community Benefits Coalition, we're going to talk about them a little bit later, but they were in the process of organizing for a community benefits agreement. And one day the mayor called a press conference. He came out, he held up a document. He said, we have a CBA. And it was a document that the mayor had created and had no community buy-in at all. Unfortunately, the coalition, who was very astute, was at the press conference. They took a copy of what the mayor had presented, and they lit it on fire. And it was a really important moment. It was good thinking and good organizing. And the community just said, that's not a community benefits agreement without the community. So strong coalitions are really what's key to winning big. And so, I think there's a lot of the elements of a strong coalition coming together, it sounds like, in Buffalo. And it's really important to be very for the coalition to be very systematic about bringing in people, especially in areas where you're not as strong as you would like to be. So, you know, you might be very strong on policy, but you need to bring in folks who are stronger on neighborhood organizing, or you may need to bring in folks who have more connections with elected officials to do kind of the inside part of organizing. I don't know what the strengths and weaknesses are right now, but it's pretty important to be very thoughtful about how you build the coalition. And with a strong enough coalition, you can win just about anything. And that brings us back to Pittsburgh. And I like to talk about them because one, they ultimately had over 100 organizations as part of their coalition. And although they addressed the really big issues that you see in CBAs, the job quality, job training, they also very much had their ear to the ground in terms of what neighborhood priorities were. And so there was a food desert in the area adjacent to the arena, and they were that was an important issue in terms of getting people engaged around the agreement, and they were able to win a full service grocery store. Actually, the original one didn't make it, but they've just opened a second one on the site, and part of the ability to have the grocery store was funding that was part of the CBA. There also, more importantly, was a very deep memory in Pittsburgh about what had happened when they built the last arena, which was called Mellon Arena. And they had torn down big parts of what had been historically a Black neighborhood and made lots of promises about the jobs that were going to come about as part of this investment in the Mellon Arena. And no one in the poorest neighborhoods of Pittsburgh has any memory of people getting any jobs as a result of that, either from the construction or in the wake of the construction. And so there was a very strong feeling that people had that they needed something in writing. They were tired of empty promises. And so having a CBA became really part of the culture among people who felt like there had been broken promises before. So it's really important to, as organizers and as coalition partners, to think about the issues that are going to resonate most strongly with the people who can help push this coalition forward. In Denver, I mean, this is a great, very recent, last November was, the city is proposing, they've been starting to work on the expansion of what's called the National Western Stockyards. There's a big National Western rodeo every year, and it's kind of like a state fair, but the site is equivalent to a football stadium. And much of the site, the city already has the money to reinvest. They got some partners with the university, but there's 80 acres which are not yet committed. And the city had a bond initiative in November. There were 8 or 9 different bond proposals on the ballot, and they all passed except for the one for National Western. It was over $100 million, and that was to accelerate the redevelopment of the 80-acre triangle. Now, this coalition from Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, historically Mexican neighborhood, has been organizing for a while. They're small. It's a very, very small communities, but they were able to put out the message more broadly that this money being invested in the stock show had no kind of immediate return for the people of Denver. And that was the only part of the ballot initiative that was defeated in November. And it was a enormous victory for a very small group, and again, is a testimony to the power of very good organizing. So Andrea, thanks, gave the plug for our newsletter. In fact, it comes out tomorrow, every other Friday. If you'd like to subscribe, you can drop me email, and we'll be happy to add you to the list. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back to Andrea to keep us moving here.
Thanks so much, John. And again, some really interesting points for us to grapple with here as we keep working toward a coalition and an effort for a CBA here. Some interesting comments coming in already. So I would invite folks with those comments to raise your hand or unmute and jump in. We see we have folks on the call from some of our labor partners, from housing agencies, from education. So we'd love to hear from you. I think first, let's see if anybody has questions or comments for John, or certainly anything that I shared about the Buffalo and Erie County conversation so far. Any questions or comments, and then we'd like to save some time to hear from you all on what's missing from the list. What priorities do you have as we keep raising this CBA discussion? Ms. Barr, I was hoping you'd jump in with the hand raised there. As someone who was involved in one of the main sites of previous CBA discussion here in Buffalo in the Fruit Belt neighborhood, which of course had huge work toward community benefits with the medical campus.
You're going to excuse me because I'm actually going to be heading out the door in a few minutes. I got to get a bus, but you know, I think it's important to mention that much as, you know, to the work that you guys, some of you have been involved in, the rehab, the money that the city says is not there for the rehab of existing structures, homes. I think that it's important to make sure that there is funding that's going to be put towards a program for that. Because if the city is not willing to recognize the architecture that they're supposed to be famous for, then we have to find a way to make sure there's a funding stream to enhance that program that's already in place and make sure that we can put some teeth financially towards rehabbing these structures. So I'm going to leave that there and I'm going to go. I'm sorry. This is a really good conversation, but I got to catch a bus.
No problem at all. Thanks for coming. And absolutely, that's a point we've heard from partners, the need for kind of housing stock funding here. We've also heard, you know, with the focus on youth and youth athletics, youth wellness, youth health, that maybe some funding set aside for lead poisoning prevention work. We're still grappling with very high levels of lead exposure, could be a good fit. Bridge, please jump in.
Yeah, I just had a question, like, you know, so, you know, I think everybody's on board that CBAs are great and everything. But, you know, like in the previous discussions around CBAs that we've had here in Western New York, you know, they always kind of like, you know, stall out, like, you know, not with like a binding agreement, you know, that, and, you know, I think part of the issue is like, you know, that like, you know, folks are just like, so, you know, have been defeated so many times, like in our region, like, you know, just, I mean, we're talking about the Bills here, right? You know, so, you know, just how do we like get past that hump? You know, it's like help people realize that, you know, like we deserve this. Like, this is something that like, you know, like it's not like a unreasonable demand. You know, like this is something that we deserve. You know, how do we get people past that hump?
So in my experience, it's about telling a story and, you know, working together as leaders of the coalition to sort of craft that story together, but certainly elements of that story would be, the huge amount of money that we're talking about giving to an organization that already has probably more money than anybody else in Buffalo. That is part of the story. Second is contrasting that with disinvestment that's happened in neighborhoods. And then third, being very strong in terms of saying, now, if we're going to, and I think you have to make a decision, which decision probably is that you're not going to say that you oppose the stadium. It just seems like that's not where the public discourse is going, but being able to say, now, if we're going to do this, we're going to invest this money, then we as residents of Buffalo deserve a fair return on our investment. Any investor would say that. And you certainly are entitled to that. And then being able to say, look, here's the places that we need to invest. And by the way, housing rehabilitation and funding the rehabilitation of existing structures has been part of a number of CBAs, including the one in Pittsburgh. So that's not out of the question. I think the art to this is figuring out, and part of it is actually going out and doing some canvassing or figuring out a way to get input from people, is figuring out what the pieces are that connect most with people. And that's a little bit of the art of putting this piece together. But I do think you can craft a message that makes it almost a no-brainer and will really put the elected officials on the defensive.
And I see a hand raised from Kimberly, so please jump in.
So I had a question. So CBAs sound amazing and they sound very innovative when it comes to just all of the different pieces and what it can accomplish. Why aren't we seeing more of these? And why are they so hard to accomplish? Is it the community engagement part? Because this is the first time I've actually heard of a CBA, and I'm pretty excited about it, but I'm a little confused about the fact that I haven't heard more about it.
Well, I'll Kimberly, let me just quickly give a little bit of background. I think of CBAs as part of a broader movement for accountable development. And sometimes it'll be called the CBA. Sometimes there are pieces of it that are a local hire agreement or project labor agreement, or sometimes the provisions are split into pieces. Since I've been keeping track of coalitions that are working on these issues, I have in a database 350 local coalitions from around the country that have worked either on community benefits or on some other piece of accountable development. Sometimes it's requirements when cities give tax abatements, or there are other pieces to this that are very similar. So it's been no one has really ever connected the dots, and I'm in the process of actually doing that. We're going to put a resource center online the next couple of months. The fact that that people in local communities all over the country have come to the same conclusion, that economic development doesn't necessarily benefit most people. It mainly, the rules benefit the developers, and in this case, they benefit the team. And so there have been some efforts in Buffalo before, a couple of them around the harbor, the redevelopment of the harbor. This was, I think more than 10 years ago, and then a couple around the expansion of the hospital. But this is the first really big opportunity to do a community benefits agreement in Buffalo. I think the good news is that there is so much experience around the country to build on, that sort of those technical points are, when I first started doing this work, like we were making the rules as we went along. We have to invent the policy pieces and all of that. Now a lot of that work is done. So the biggest part is really around the organizing part. And I, said that a few times in the presentation, and I want to keep coming back to it, because the real measure of how successful you can be is on how well you organize.
And John, I'll just add to that as well. Kimberly, across some of our work with our partners at PPG, even when it's not for a specific community benefits agreement, there is this theme of where public money goes, public benefits should follow. So we had, I think she's left the meeting, but Catherine Franco was on the call, and she coordinates something called the Buffalo Niagara Community Reinvestment Coalition that focuses, for example, on community benefits from our banks in particular. And we look at that quite often when there are public subsidies on the table for different developments. And as John mentioned, there was a big effort toward a community benefits agreement for Buffalo's waterfront and canal side. And the group at that time ended up getting a kind of statement of principles that they negotiated with the Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation that did not get to the level of a binding community benefits agreement, but that did inform a lot of what's happened at the waterfront. And I'll put in the chat, we have a good kind of history policy brief that tracks what happened. For example, the waterfront could look very different. That group fought off a Bass Pro Shop, a big box store that the state was going to give $35 million in subsidies to build that on the waterfront, when really very few local residents were interested or asking for that. And the brief goes into why was that even something on the table. So even when we don't quite get the binding agreement, these discussions can really influence the way development takes shape, what our city and region ends up looking like. But yeah, a good question for sure, and definitely more to be done. Any other questions, or would also love to hear from participants on areas of concern, issues that you'd like to see the Pagula Sports and Entertainment and the Bills Stadium deal address? Bridge.
Yeah, I just really want to emphasize that directly neighboring the Bill Stadium is ECC South, where Erie County holds its civil service exams, and students are going all the time, and there's only bus service there Monday through Friday. So when those civil service exams are on the weekends, no one from the city who is transit reliant can access those. So I want to emphasize the importance of really connecting the reliable transit 7 days a week to the South towns, and using this as an opportunity to do so. So thank you.
If I could, Bridge, I want to encourage you and everyone who's part of this to actually think big. That just adding transit service 2 days a week, why not build out a 21st century transit system? Certainly the Bills would like to have public transit coming to their new stadium. I suspect that there's going to be other development around there as well that's going to be 365 days a year, whether it's entertainment, whether it's market rate housing, whatever it is. And so I think this is a great example of an opportunity to think big about what a 21st century transit option might be that could be part of the public investment here.
Yeah, just to add on that, I would love to see a bus rapid transit system that connects the city to all the South towns. It's I mean, we could dream even bigger than that, a full extension of the light rail. But, like at the very least, I think like, it's a very reasonable ask to extend like a bus rapid transit system like to the south towns, like from downtown.
Great. I know one of the questions that we had from someone who wasn't able to attend at this hour was about the urgency. So what does the timeline look like, both for this specific one? And then I don't know if John had any thoughts or expansions on what the timeline looked like for any of the previous examples that he had mentioned.
Yeah, so I can share what we know right now. As I mentioned, is that Governor Hochul is still saying they want to get this deal, the public funding, into this year's state budget, which gets finalized by April 1st. We're told by our county legislature friends that they are expecting to receive an MOU in the coming days that will ask them to kind of authorize the county to go forward with negotiations. Thankfully, they've said they're going to take up to 30 days to review that. They don't want to be rushed and pushed into a quick approval. And of course, the county legislature chairwoman, again, April Baskin, is saying we want to see the specifics of a community benefits agreement before we're asked to just give blanket approval. So that's kind of all we know about the timeline. And I certainly feel moments of regret that it is being pushed to move so quickly. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have another year? What's one more year in the stadium to really build more community input, community participation? But I think that is probably not very likely, and that things will keep moving for an April 1st state budget deadline. But John, related to timeline, please weigh in. And then I'm kind of curious too, when the deal itself gets pushed to be completed on that type of a timeline, I wonder if there are ever in other places, a kind of format where the team commits to a CBA of a certain amount of money. And again, then there's an ongoing community committee that discusses and helps determine what would those specific benefits be, even after the big top deal is made. Because I certainly feel a little bit like it'd be great to have more time to hear from more communities and actors across the county.
So the good news is that it's not too late. Once shovels are in the ground, that's when it's too late. Or once the financial deals are completed, you're pretty much too late. So it's definitely not too late. More time, especially given that the coalition's just beginning, more time is better than less time. On the other hand, deadlines create some urgency in terms of our work as well, and pushes us to be clearer about what we can and can't do. I do think that the two key timelines are the state, and I don't know, I assume the legislature, in addition to the governor putting it in her budget, that the legislature must have to vote on the budget. So that is an opportunity to weigh in. And then obviously the county, which is much closer because it's not the whole state, it's the county, is a really important opportunity to weigh in. And the question is, are there champions either at the state or at the county who are willing to take some heat and dig in for what's the right thing to do. If you think about it, and you could apply these lessons, you think about what happens in the U.S. Senate, where two senators are able to move a whole lot of their personal agenda because their votes are so important. I certainly saw that play out in Wisconsin around the Milwaukee Brewers baseball stadium, where it was a very close vote, and Republicans didn't want it actually because they thought it was too much public money, and there was, they needed a couple of Republican votes, and actually the key Republican vote, who ended up voting for it, ended up losing his seat. He voted for the stadium and then lost his seat to a Democrat because he voted for it. But anyway, there's all the politics that plays out around it. And so it's important for some people in your coalition to be the ones that really can play the inside game. At the same time that the coalition is building the support on the outside, there needs to be some people who are assigned, at least in pre-COVID days, it was like, you have to go have lunch with this representative once a week until, the decision's made. But, whatever way there is of interacting, there needs to be an inside strategy as well, because those are where you're going to have the chance to make an impact. As far as creating a fund to be decided later, two things about that. One is that the leverage later is nowhere close to what the leverage is before they make the decision. So they could commit to a fund and then, spend the money on things that they were going to do anyway, or, it'd be very hard, I think, to build the community benefits agenda after the decision's already been made. I think a second thing that arises when there's money and some of the worst deals, and I'm thinking about Yankee Stadium with Forest City Ratner was the developer, and they wrote their own community benefit agreement. They created some community organizations that they gave money to. Having money is not necessarily the best way to get at the issues that the community wants. I think it's a much preferable goal is to have very clear objective requirements and roles and responsibilities for everyone. And that means the team, it means the county, and it means the coalition's responsibility, part of which will be to build, if there's a CBA, that you'll build support in the community for the agreement. And so having the issues addressed by the time the funding decisions are made are the best opportunity. Maybe there's a chance to do something else if that can't happen. Maybe there's a chance to address funding for some issues, but I would say I'd work full steam ahead right now on trying to get this done quickly. And also, if there's a couple of champions, maybe their role as champions is to just say, we want to delay the vote for 30 days, and that gives you 30 more days to organize. I mean, I think really focusing on those votes at the state and the county is the most important thing to do.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And I think for me, certainly a big takeaway is, getting that seat at the table. We don't have it now. And I think our lead government negotiators are not necessarily mindful of, we need community members at the table. So that's certainly one. In addition to the list of benefits, that's the big piece to be pushing for. So thanks so much.
Great. I think we are at time. I know there were a couple other questions that folks had asked via email. So I just want to encourage everyone who were able to attend today. If you do have questions, we'd be happy to take them afterwards. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. We're going to be sending out the recording of this and any of the materials that we referenced in the chat. Otherwise, thank you again. And we look forward to hearing from you and hopefully ensuring you also have a seat at the table as we continue these conversations. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.